Hey, this is Warren Redlick. Elon Musk and SpaceX are fighting with the state of California, and in particular, the California Coastal Commission. Listen to these clips.
Right now, Elon Musk is hopping about the country, spewing and tweeting political falsehoods and attacking FEMA while claiming his desire to help the hurricane victims.
This company is owned by the richest person in the world with direct control over what could be the most extensive global communication system on the planet. And just last week, that person was speaking about political retribution on a national stage. But yet he was standing next to a candidate that openly promotes and is working to normalize that language, right? And the reason I bring that up is because everyone feels that. And so I just want to make sure that we can't hide from that, and we have to push back against that. And we're talking about the promotion of this technology and a human being that has so much power.
So these are two commissioners on the California Coastal Commission who are absolutely 100% not doing the job they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be reviewing the environmental issues involved in SpaceX launches. They're not supposed to be reviewing the political views of the CEO, how wealthy he is, who he's campaigning with. That's not your job. That's fundamentally what this video is about. This video is about what the California Coastal Commission did here. And there's some history that I think a lot of people don't know. So this caught a little bit of attention. Governor Gavin Newsom suddenly said, well, I don't agree with that. And of course, these are his people doing his bidding. And then now that it blew up in his face, oh, I didn't want that. Yeah, okay. But I want to go through the history of what's been going on. This has been going on about 10, we thought this just happened. This has actually been going on for about 10 months, where the California Coastal Commission has been harassing SpaceX in a variety of ways, not just on Elon's politics, although it appears that their disagreement with Elon's politics is what has driven them to do a bunch of things that are wrong. This is going to be a long video, but I got a quick summary for you first. First of all, the harassment started about December of 2023. We learned about it in October of 2024. So there's a bunch of things that happened between December of 2023 and October of 2024, and that's part of what we're going to go through here. You can see the different steps that the California Coastal Commission did that took them from what they're supposed to be doing to what they're doing now, which is wrong. The obvious issue that you just saw is making their decision for partisan politics. If Elon supported Biden, there wouldn't be a problem. If they were Trump supporters, this wouldn't be a problem. And that's not your job. It's not your job to make political decisions. That is wrong. Your job is to make a decision. How is this impacting the coast of California? Not how is this impacting national security, the political presidential campaign, political retribution. None of that is your job. And what you're doing is political retribution. Third, less obvious to most, they're not supposed to consider politics at all, just environmental issues. And then also you probably see this is on a military base. This is Vandenberg Air Force Base, Vandenberg Space Force Base. Why would a state government have authority over what's happening on a military base? So that's going to come up. We're going to explain that a little bit. And there's technical legal issues about the California Coastal Commission input and launch activity. What input do they have? What can they require of SpaceX? And there's different ways of approaching that. There's federal agency activity and there's federally permitted activity. And they switched the rule. The rule was federal agency activity, which means California Coastal Commission doesn't have much to say, can't do very much. They're trying to interpret SpaceX's activities now as federally permitted activities. We're going to get into explaining that, and that gives them more power. So they're basically grabbing more power, but they're not doing that to the other launch providers. They're only doing it to SpaceX. Why? Because they're targeting Elon Musk. Congress was clear in encouraging the commercial launch industry. This is a thing. They're saying, well, you're doing commercial launches, you're not doing military launches, so that puts you as a federally permitted activity, not a federal agency activity. And that goes against what Congress set up with the commercial launch program. The idea is if you have a great commercial launch industry, then you have more available launch providers, better available launch access for the military, because you have this incredibly reliable Falcon 9 program now. So when the military needs a launch, SpaceX is ready and other launch providers will be ready. And SpaceX shares data. with the military on every launch, so the military is more prepared for their launches. So this is not just SpaceX launching launches for profit. This benefits the military too. And finally, SpaceX argues this base isn't even included in the California Coastal Commission's domain. We'll talk about that. This is what's called a complaint. This is the caption of the complaint. SpaceX Technologies on the far side of the document here. SpaceX or Space Exploration Technologies Corp. That's SpaceX's formal name versus California Coastal Commission, and then a whole bunch of names of people who are involved with the California Coastal Commission. And it's a complaint for declaratory and injunctive relief. Declaratory, they want the court to declare something. That's not your job. Injunctive relief, they want the court to enjoin the California Coastal Commission from doing stuff it's not supposed to do. They want them to stop their misbehavior and force them to behave properly. Injunctive relief, but they're not seeking money. There's no complaint for money damages. They're not asking for money. We want the court to say what they're doing is wrong, and we want the court to force them to either stop doing what they're doing or start doing what they should do. The way a lot of complaints start is what's called an introduction. It's not actually required, but it's very common that when the judge looks at this, we want him to get the basic story before we get into the technical legal stuff. So this case is about a state agency, the California Coastal Commission, and egregiously and unlawfully overreaching its authority. So there's a few different things here, but they engaged in naked political discrimination. That's what you saw in the clips. In violation of the First Amendment free speech. Second, the commission is trying to unlawfully regulate space launch programs, which are critical to national security. Vandenberg Space Force Base, a federal enclave. Okay, so it's a federal property. State agency shouldn't be regulating a federal property. And this is a critical detail. Until December 2023, the commission has agreed with the longstanding position of the Air Force that the base's commercial space launch programs are federal agency activities not subject to the commission's control. That's a critical detail, not their permitting authority or control. Since it was founded in 1972, it never disputed that. And then all of a sudden, it did. Even now, the commission has continued to agree that every other commercial launch provider's launch programs are federal agency activities. It's only SpaceX that they've decided we have this new standard we're applying to you, federally permitted activities instead of federal agency activities. It went against longstanding federal policy and law, its own established practices and findings. This isn't the way they used to do things. They changed the way they do things, and the limitations on its authority under the law to impose a different standard on SpaceX. Now, what they're saying is, hey, you've started launching commercial launches like Starlink launches, and that's not a federal agency activity. Well, but they've been launching Starlink launches for long before December 2023, so that's obviously not the trigger for this behavior. Something else happened, and we know it's politics. Commission now posits that SpaceX's launch program is a federally permitted or licensed activity so SpaceX to force SpaceX to obtain a permit to conduct launches. They don't have to get a permit to conduct launches as a federal agency activity, and the permitting process creates a lot more work for SpaceX and gives the commission more power to try to control SpaceX's activities. Why would we want the California Coastal Commission to have control over SpaceX's launches that are on a military base? You know, as we just saw, the commission's public hearing record indisputably shows overt and shocking political bias. Even the governor agreed with that. Even the governor, who has been very nasty to Elon, who's very political himself, who appointed these people, even he agreed that that was wrong. And you can see that what they said. I don't think we had this one in the video clip. Carol Hart, the concern is with SpaceX increasing its launches. We're dealing with a company, the head of which has aggressively injected himself into the presidential race and made it clear what his point of view is. Not your job. You heard Commissioner Gretchen Newsom earlier. You heard Commissioner Mike Newsom earlier. Commissioner Cummings, we're all trying to operate in this apolitical space. It's an apolitical space. You're not supposed to be political. We do know this person who controls these companies has enough power to not work in the best interest of our allies. Since when does the California Coastal Commission make decisions about what's in the interest of the allies of the United States? Not your job. The Air Force wants this. The Air Force wants SpaceX to continue launches. The Air Force is much more appropriate for deciding what's appropriate with regard to our national security and our allies than some hack, Democratic Party hack who got appointed to a commission to regulate environmental issues on the coastline. What are you doing? It's not your job. When I say that they're letting other launch providers do stuff, they've recently approved another commercial space launch operator launching up to 60 launches a year from the same base, and they agreed that that was federal agency activity. I think it's Phantom Space. Why is Phantom Space a federal agency activity, but SpaceX isn't? because Phantom Space's CEO isn't out campaigning with Donald Trump. Just not your job. I mentioned this in the summary, but the Commission's decision interferes with the operations of a national space launch program. The space launch program is not a California launch program. It is not a California environmental program. It is a national space launch program conducted at a U.S. Air Force Base, a federal enclave, protected by the Constitution from intrusive state regulation. We have a system of government where there's a federal government, there's a state government, there's local governments, and state governments can control their local governments, but there's this interplay between federal and state, and generally speaking, state governments don't have the authority to tell the federal government what to do on federal land. This is federal land, this is federal property, federal activities going on here, not your job, not your place. So we're going to get into this later. The Commission's own governing statute expressly states it does not apply to federal land, going so far as to define coastal land to exclude all federal territory. So SpaceX is contractually required to share, this is a critical point about how this is still a federal agency activity. SpaceX is contractually required to share data with the US government for every single one of its launches, whether it's carrying a government payload or not. SpaceX's commercial launches contribute to the overall national security space launch enterprise. The government needs to know information about how launches are working so that they can be better prepared for their own launches. US government has long established that commercial launch services are critical to America's assured access to space. Just like we like to have a good commercial shipping fleet, so in the event of war, we have access to more ships to be able to carry troops or carry cargo where it needs to go. And that was a big issue during World War II, or being able to access space, which has become a high priority for the Defense Department. Having a strong launch industry with commercial launch providers who have other sources of income besides government means that you now have more launches available, more launch providers available, more launch access. So when the military needs to launch something, it's available. It's reliable. They can count on it. This is another part of the legal technicalities is you list the parties. So in the caption, you had Space Exploration Technologies, Space Exploration Technologies Corp, SpaceX, and you had the California Coastal Commission, a bunch of people. So you identify the parties. Plaintiff SpaceX identifies who SpaceX is. Defendant, the California Coastal Commission. This is important, is a quasi-judicial state agency. We're going to talk about this quasi-judicial role more, but fundamentally, you have different parts of government. So in the legislature, you have politicians who are making laws. That is a political process. And it can be partisan. They can have political reasons for their behavior because they're making laws. That's the system that we have. Then you have the executive branch. The executive branch executes the laws that the legislature passes. Now, the executive branch and governors and presidents play a role in the legislative process. They veto, they negotiate with the legislature whenever they do. Once the law is passed, then the executive branch is supposed to carry out the law. And within that, there's discretion about how the executive branch carries out the law. And sometimes they use political considerations to decide whether they're going to enforce border laws or let more people in, right? Or whether they're going to put children in cages as part of, if you believe that. And just a lot of different federal and state laws. Governors, even prosecutors can sometimes decide, I'm not going to prosecute that, even though I can prosecute it, even though the law says I should prosecute it. I'm going to use prosecutorial discretion. There's executive discretion, and political issues can play a role in those decisions. But courts are not supposed to be political. And the California Coastal Commission is a quasi-judicial state agency. Its job is judicial, not executive. They're not supposed to let politics interfere. And they're also limited, right? They're supposed to talk about the environment. They're not supposed to be talking about national security, not your job. So a little bit of background, legal background. This, again, one of the things that you do in a complaint, you tell the judge, this is the laws that are relevant to what we're going to talk about. Coastal Zone Management Act is a law that was passed by Congress in 1972. It's been updated here and there. And this law says we need to manage the coastline. We're going to have the states create state bodies, state agencies to participate in making sure their coastline is taken care of properly. And that's part of what led to the California Coastal Commission. And then the state of California passed the California Coastal Act. It makes that agency responsible for reviewing federal agency actions affecting the coastal zone for consistency with the federal approved California Coastal Management Program. So you've got a coastal management program. This is how we're going to manage the coast. And you're supposed to have input. Say, hey, we see what you're doing here. We want to make sure this is consistent with our coastal zone management program. Federal government can override it, but it's sort of like the federal government tries to cooperate with the state to try to make sure that they're doing that. So one of the critical details is in, I think, both the Coastal Zone Management Act and the California statute. The base is federal land that's excluded from the coastal zone. So they don't really have authority to regulate the base. Again, the military cooperates with the California Coastal Commission, gives them some input, but really ultimately everything is the military's call. Unless it becomes, there's two types of actions reviewable under the Coastal Zone Management Act, the federal law: federal agency activity and federally licensed or permitted activity. So if you're in federal agency activity, the power of the commission is very limited. If you're in federally licensed or permitted activity, then the commission can say, hey, you need to submit a permit. You need to apply for a permit to be able to do what you're doing. Federally licensed or permitted activity. So the standard, what you have to do to comply is looser. The federal agency has more leeway to get close to what you want. If it's a federally permitted activity, it's tighter, it's more tighter restrictions. So for decades, the Air Force has treated commercial space operations by SpaceX and other commercial operators, because there's been plenty of launches throughout history that weren't SpaceX launches, that were for commercial purposes, other commercial operators at the base, as federal agency activity. Just a little detail here. A lot of launches are done from Florida and they go east. Some launches do what's called a polar orbit, where they go south or they go north. And Vandenberg, because you don't usually want to go the other direction. The way the Earth is rotating, you usually want to go east. Vandenberg is used to launch polar routes sometimes. That's why they're launching from Vandenberg. That's the advantage. When you're doing polar routes, Vandenberg is a good location for that. So the Department of Defense has repeatedly made clear to the Commission that activities on military installations in California, including the base, are federal agency activities, not federally permitted activities subject to state permit requirements. Now, so you go back to before this stuff started happening, before December 2023, the Air Force evaluated the increasing launch cadence of Falcon 9 rockets at the base up to 36 launches annually, made a negative determination saying it was okay, there's no concerns, and the Commission concurred on May 5th, 2023. The proposed launch, and the proposed launch activities are similar to those concurred with by the Commission. We therefore concur with your negative determination. There's no problem. So, as of May 2023, the California Coastal Commission was on board. This all started when SpaceX and the military wanted to increase launches to 36 launches. Where we are now is SpaceX wants to increase from 36 to 50, and the military wants them to increase from 36 to 50. But so back in May of 2023, following longstanding practice, following what everybody agreed, federal agency activity, no problem here, go ahead. And just a quick point, by the way, as far as the environment goes, SpaceX is the only launch provider where the boosters land and come back and don't pollute the ocean. Everybody else's boosters crash into the ocean, and not very much damage, but SpaceX's launches are actually less impact on the environment than anybody else's launches because the booster is recovered. And the second stage goes somewhere far away from the coastal zone, so not an issue. So if you were concerned about the environmental impact, SpaceX has the lowest environmental impact of anybody who's launching. So just a few months later, the Commission reversed course. So this is when it started. December 15, 2023, reneged on its concurrence. The Commission asked the Air Force, so they said they all of a sudden no longer believed there was a negative determination, no problem. Commission asked the Air Force to provide more information about the 36 launch cadence increase in potential coastal effects. So then there's a report from the California Coastal Commission disputed the Air Force's longstanding policy and the Commission's longstanding practice of recognizing and reviewing commercial launch operations as a federal agency activity. This is a critical, it's not the obvious critical issue that we all see, which is you're engaging in political behavior rather than what you're supposed to be doing, which is judging whether there's an environmental impact, right? But there's a second issue, which is how much power do they have to review? If it's a federal agency activity, they don't have much say. If it's a federally licensed or federally permitted activity, then all of a sudden they have a lot more power and they can demand that SpaceX submit permit applications. They can make things take longer and so on. There was a meeting in April 2024, and somebody speaking on behalf of the State Lands Commission said, I just don't think SpaceX should be able to skirt the requirements for a CDP, a development permit, a coastal development permit, when there's clear intent to conduct primarily for-profit business activity and not federal activity. Commissioner Nodoff suggested maybe there's some other launch sites that SpaceX could use to spread the impact out over the globe. Most SpaceX launches happen from Florida, and some SpaceX launches, very minimally, happen from Texas. Most SpaceX launches are happening somewhere else. Do you want them to start launching from foreign countries because of your national security concerns? What the hell are you talking about here? So you can see that, and this isn't even a commissioner, this is from the State Lands Commission. All these political hacks, Democratic Party hacks who get appointed to jobs in the state government, appointed probably by Governor Newsom, are all of a sudden now stepping in here and saying, hey, wait a minute, we want SpaceX to come under more control. We want to have more control over what Elon Musk's company is doing. Now we move on from April to May. The commission staff now. So first you have the commission, and the commission staff were saying, no, you have to go along with the Air Force. This is federal agency activity. Now in May of 2024, the commission staff reversed their position, and now they say, oh no, this is a federally permitted activity, and they have to show that they're. Why is the commission staff changing their minds? What happened? What happened along the way? Nothing changed in what SpaceX is doing. SpaceX has been launching Starlink launches for a long time. SpaceX has been launching commercial launches for a long time. Nothing changed. Something changed politically where Lawfare, whether it's Biden or Newsom, came in and started pushing the commission. Let's see how we can screw with SpaceX and Elon's company. It's hard to conclude there's some other reason, because what changed otherwise that led you to do this? June of 2024, the Air Force sent a letter. The Air Force explained that Falcon 9 program consistent to the maximum extent practicable. That's the federal agency standard. And federal activities are not subject to California Coastal Zone Management Program's Coastal Development Permit. Air Force reiterated that launches on the base constitute federal agency actions. So you realize that the Air Force, the military, is on SpaceX's side. And you have the federal government, and there's definitely federal agencies that Biden has pushed to attack Elon, to attack his companies. But the military is like, well, we need this guy. We have important launches to do. We have important work to do, and we need this guy. And you guys can play all your political games all you want. It's harder for the lawfare to intrude on the military. The military, they value SpaceX. And this is where you have this big federal government, and there's diverse interests in the federal government. We should have a small federal government. We wouldn't have as much of these problems, but you have different aspects of the federal government, and some are pushing against Elon, and some are like, hey, wait a minute, we need this guy. We need what this company is doing. Now we get to July, and the commission staff issued a third report, recommended imposing a bunch of conditions, 7 conditions on launches. The Air Force decided, okay, well, we'll agree to a few of your conditions, not all of them. Commission adopted the report in full, conditionally incurred. During the hearing, this is August 2024, Commission raised numerous concerns unrelated to potential effects on coastal resources. So this is back in August. We saw these videos from October where the commissioners were saying things that were inappropriate and not in their job. And you can see it here. Commissioner Wilson, who you saw in one of the clips earlier, says, we have actors in that space both engaging in foreign military activities, engaging in misinformation, dabbling in misinformation within the social media spheres. What are you doing? This is just not your job. He's talking about Elon, misinformation, social media. What does this have to do with your job of regulating the coastline? Making sure the coastline is, environmental issues on the coastline are safe. What are you doing? Commissioner Cummings also asked national security questions. Not your job. What is this guy doing? This is back in August. So this, again, we thought this started in October. As you get into the complaint, you realize it started back in December of 2023, and you can see it's continuing and escalating. One of the things that's going on is the commission has now been asserting that SpaceX has to get a coastal development permit. So September 13th, that started in December 2023. And September 13, 2024, they demanded that SpaceX obtain a coastal development permit to conduct launches, threatened enforcement against the Falcon 9 launch program, stated the commission will not agree to cadence increases if SpaceX doesn't obtain a permit. September 27, commission again stated its position in a staff report. Report states the commission's position that Falcon 9 launches are federally permitted activities requiring a coastal development permit. Federal agency activities, you don't need a permit from the state, from the Coastal Commission. Federally permitted activities, looser standard. If you're not doing federal agency activities, you're doing something else. But they're saying that for-profit activities are not federal agency activities. Air Force disagrees. SpaceX disagrees. We'll see what the judge says. They keep pushing on this conditional development permit. Commissioner Hart said explicitly, the concern is with SpaceX increasing its launches, not with other companies increasing their launches. We're dealing with a company, the head of which has aggressively injected himself into the presidential race and made it clear what his point of view is. So you're not applying the federal agencies versus federally licensed activity standard to other companies because their companies have not injected themselves into politics. This is a glaring error. And one of the things, by the way, I want to point this out. Gavin Newsom said, well, I don't agree with what they did. Then fire people. Governor DeSantis fires people. This is like the huge distinction between the Republicans. I'm not a fan of the Republican Party, don't get me wrong. But this is a huge distinction between Donald Trump and the Democrats, and maybe to some extent other Republicans. But Ron DeSantis is with this. If you don't agree with what somebody's doing, you're the boss and they're doing something wrong, you fire them. I think there was a debate where Trump said, you never fire anybody to Biden. These people should be fired. They are clearly not doing the job that they were assigned to do. You are supposed to review environmental issues. You're not supposed to use political reasons to start treating people differently. This is fundamentally wrong in a society where it's governed by law. You're a quasi-judicial body. You're supposed to make judicial decisions within the scope of what you have. Nobody asked you to review national security. Nobody asked you to make political decisions. This is not your job. And Newsom, Governor Newsom, there's a Commissioner Newsom in here, but I don't think they're related. Governor Newsom said, I don't agree with what they did. Well, then do something about it. You're the governor. Demand that they resign. Tell them to resign. Fire them. Do something. Don't just make some fluff statement, well, I don't agree with what they did. Baloney, you told them to do it. Again, the commissioners raised other concerns, which I think we saw. Cummings admitted, they brought up SpaceX's labor practices, and Commissioner Cummings admitted that SpaceX's labor practices fall outside the commission's purview. Now, for people who aren't familiar with that term, the purview, this is the scope of what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be covering this stuff. Your job does not include reviewing a company's labor practices. You're reviewing environmental issues, coastal issues. What SpaceX does with its employees is not your business. There's other people and other places who are supposed to review their labor practices. There's other people who are supposed to be doing the job about national security issues, political stuff, not your job. And then he went ahead and talked about SpaceX's labor practices anyway. They cited debunked theories about, I think they were talking about Elon not letting the Ukraine use Starlink to attack Crimea, which is false, but again, still not your job. There's this theory that Elon stopped Ukraine from attacking Crimea, and the reality is it was federal government policy that Starlink couldn't be active in Crimea. And the federal government, Joe Biden, didn't say, hey, Elon, turn on Starlink over Crimea. It was Ukraine saying, hey, could you turn it on? Well, Elon doesn't work for, Elon is not a Ukrainian citizen. He's an American citizen. His company is governed by American law, and American law said you can't do that. And then about Mr. Musk's motivation for seeking federal contracts. What does that have to do with your job? Nothing. Nothing, not your job. So then we get to the last part of the complaint, the claims. So the counts of the claims. This is the legal issue narrowed down, and this is what we want as a result. So I'm only going to do count 1 and count 5 just because it doesn't need to be that complicated. The first count just says the commission lacks the authority for its actions under the law. Falcon 9 launch program is a federal agency activity, not a federally permitted activity, and the base is not in a coastal zone. So that's one. And we have a little bit of follow-up here. The harm, this is another important issue. What's the harm? How is SpaceX harmed by this? The commission's demand for a consistency certification would trigger a review period by the commission of 6 months or more, as opposed to a 90-day period for consistency. So in one scenario, it takes 6 months for SpaceX to get approval. In another scenario, it takes 90 days. So you're adding 3 months for SpaceX to get things done. We don't have enough permitting requirements. And, SpaceX has to get permits for all this stuff from the Air Force in the first place, right? So they're already going through requesting this stuff within the Air Force. Now you're going to make them repeat it, and you're going to make it take an extra 90 days. It would also require to encourage SpaceX to incur substantial expense to prepare more documents for the Coastal Commission that it's really already preparing for the Space Force, Air Force, whatever, but it has to redo them in the correct form. That just creates more work. It would require the Falcon 9 launch program to meet higher standards for complying with the coastal zone, as opposed to the standards that federal agencies have to comply with. And then if SpaceX doesn't agree with the Coastal Commission's determination, if it's a federal permitted activity, then they have to appeal to the NOAA. If it's a federal agency activity, they can go ahead and launch over the commission's objection as long as the Air Force is on their side. So there's fundamentally this question: do you want a California environmental agency staffed by Democratic Party hacks to have control over national security issues and national space launch program? Or do you think maybe the Air Force is better placed to make these decisions? And then count 5 is this point about the improper, trying to punish SpaceX for the free speech exercise of Elon Musk. Elon Musk says, I want Trump to be the president, not Biden. Elon Musk says some political things. Elon Musk controls X, which allows free speech. and you've decided we don't like SpaceX because of the political activities of its boss, not your job, and that violates the fundamental rights of SpaceX, which is to be free from this kind of discrimination, on unconstitutional discrimination, free from retaliation for the political views of its owners. At the October hearing and before, really, the commission made clear that its actions were motivated by disagreement and concern with Mr. Musk's political expressions, not a genuine concern with federal agency activity versus federally licensed activity, because they didn't apply it to other launch providers. So SpaceX has the right under the First Amendment to conduct its business without retaliation by state officials who disagree or dislike SpaceX's lawful policies. Please check. The commission is wrong, and everyone should try to be less wrong. So let's hope the commission learns and buys the t-shirt, and maybe you'll buy the t-shirt and encourage people to be less wrong. We're always wrong. We should try to be less wrong. I really appreciate your support. Please support me as a subscriber on the X platform. Please support me as a YouTube channel member, on the Daily Live, on Patreon. Check out the t-shirts at elonbits.com. Check out my other videos. Share this video, like, and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.